But we're here today with the new Polestar 4. And this is really a big change for Polestar. This is not just a new model to sell alongside the 2 and the 3. This is Polestar's first own car from the ground up. Because up till now, everything else has been based on Volvo stuff. So the 2 was based on a Volvo, actually the 1 was based on a Volvo too. And the 3, although it is also new, does share a platform with the Volvo EX90, but this is Polestar's own. Yes, it does still share a platform with other products from the Volvo and the extended Geely family. This is very much more unique car. And you can see that in the styling, from these gorgeous split level headlamps to the very snub nose, the backlit logo now that lights up at night. This is a very cool looking car. I think it is anyway. Now there's one kind of elephant in the room that we need to get to, which is around the back. We'll get to that in a second. Underneath, you get a 100 kilowatt hour battery, 94 kilowatt hours net, and you get a choice of 4-wheel drive with 544 horsepower, that's the performance version, or rear-wheel drive with 272 horsepower, that's the standard long-range version. You also get an exceptionally long wheelbase. This is near enough a 3-meter wheelbase. It's actually slightly longer than the wheelbase in the bigger 3 SUV. This is a really stretched out car designed to give as much interior space as possible, which we'll take a look at in a second. But I did say there was something we need to go and look at around the back, and it's the rear window, or lack thereof. So this is the bit of the Polestar 4 that everybody is talking about, the back end. Now, I'm going to ignore something for a second, we'll come to it. But again, you can see this very clean, very slim, very pared back styling. This is Polestar, I think, really getting into its stride as a design-driven brand. But there's this. Or more accurately, there isn't this, because there is no glass. There is no rear window. What you've got instead up here is a camera. A very high quality, high definition camera actually, that looks out the back and projects an image onto a digital rear view mirror inside the cockpit. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But there is actually a point to this. This is, as far as we can tell anyway, not just a gimmick. The idea is that Polestar wanted to create a low-slung crossover body, something that was low to the ground, sleek, aerodynamically efficient, but it also wanted to give rear seat passengers decent headroom. And the problem is, if you try and do that with a low-slung coupe shape, you end up with the rear section of the roof sitting here, right on top of everyone's heads. So Polestar's idea was, well, why not move that structure back here, do away with the rear window, stick in a camera system instead, and that squares your circle. You get space for rear seat passengers, you get a sleek, low-slung shape, and you get your good aerodynamics. All you lose is the glass in the back. Incidentally, that panel that you can see there was never meant to be glass. That's just purely part of the rear crash structure. Now, is it successful? Well, yes, partially, but we need to take a look inside to show you more of that. Well, the first thing you can see in the back of the Polestar 4 is that certainly in one sense, the whole project of changing the roof in the back end has been successful, because look at all the space. I mean, that seat is set a very long way back, and I've still got colossal amounts of leg room and knee room, and even space for my feet just under the seat. Honestly, if there was a more normal sized driver setting this seat, I would have even more space. And it's really comfortable too, even though the floor is quite high. I don't feel like my knees are stuck up too high in the air. This is a wonderful seat, and actually I can show you a neat trick with this seat. If I pull down the armrests, there are switches here which allow me to recline. So we've gone from coupe crossovers that have very little headroom and dark, cramped rear cabins to something that provides an acreage of legroom, a reclining seat, and all the headroom you could ask for. So yeah, Polestar has been successful with that funky rear end without the rear window. Now, it is a bit disconcerting. If I'm looking to the side like this, constantly out of the periphery of my right eye, I can see there's a big black space here with no glass. And that does feel a bit strange. And it feels stranger from the driver's seat still. We'll get onto that in a minute. But to be fair, as a rear seat passenger, most of the time you're looking that way, and because of the reclining seat, you're looking that way. So there is still lots and lots of light back here. There's really good visibility out, very good quality. There's nice door bins. There's this lovely armrest. There's rear seat ventilation and air conditioning controls, 2 USB sockets. There's nets for the seat backs. Everything looks and feels really, really high class. But most of all, it's that space, it's the comfort, it's the quality. this is actually a car where you'll be as happy sitting in the back as you will in the front. Well, as successful as the rear cabin of the Polestar 4 is, up front, it's, if anything, even better. One of the things we have to commend Polestar for is a proper separate driver's instrument display. They haven't tried to package everything on the big 15-inch touchscreen, and it is so much the better for that. You can just glance here and see what you need to see. There is also a head-up display. That is very useful. There's quite a high center console, and there's really only one actual physical switch, which is here for the stereo volume and to play and pause whatever's on that stereo. It's nice, it does feel good, but we do feel it's still a bit of a shame that everything is packaged on the screen, including your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning controls. It does make it a bit more fiddly than it needs to be. That said, this screen is so much better set up than the one in the distantly related Volvo EX30. This is much, much easier to find your way around. Your air conditioning controls do stay on all the time down here at the base of the screen. That makes life easier. And there are some really nice touches in here too, particularly the ambient lighting, which allows you to choose different color schemes according to which planet of the solar system, or indeed which star of the solar system, you'd rather have. And they all change the colors and the settings. And actually, I think that's a bit gimmicky and a bit kind of, you know, there for its own sake, but it's kind of a nice touch, don't you think? So that screen is very good. What about this screen? This is the screen on which that rear camera projects, and for the most part it's good. I mean, we have become increasingly used to these rear view cameras, rear view mirrors that use cameras and digital rear view mirrors, and it's quite effective, and it's bright, and it's crisp, and it's high definition, and you can adjust it a bit in what it can look at and what it can see, and that all works really well. Now, there is actually a proper mirror here as well, and you just flip in and out of that as you would with any digital rear view mirror display. So you can set that up as an actual mirror to check the kids in the back, or just to look behind you or whatever. But what I have found is that when you're on the motorway and you want to just glance over your shoulder to check and make sure there's nothing in this lane as you move into it, yes, it does have blind spot monitoring. No, I don't completely trust systems like that all the time, so I do check. Again, your periphery's picking up that lack of a rear window, and it just feels weird. I mean, I know it shouldn't, and plenty of us drive vans, so we're kind of used to looking behind us and seeing nothing but blank, but it just is a bit odd. Now, in terms of the light coming into the cabin, thanks to that glass roof, it really isn't an issue. There's still loads and loads of light in the cabin, and these light colours and materials do help in that respect. It is a bit of a pity that this roof doesn't have a shade at all. I think it could actually do with one, even though that's heat-absorbing glass. You know, one of those electronic shades like Renault's been using lately would be nice, or even just a physical pull back and forward fabric shade would be nice. It is a pity that they're not there. Now, in terms of materials in the cabin, Polestar says that this is its most economically efficient car of all time, and a lot of that is down to the materials used in here, including the yarn on the seats, which is made from recycled plastic, which is it's effectively 3D printed, so it's made to fit the seats. There's no wastage. It's recycled and recyclable. And if you do want leather, and some people still do, Polestar says, yes, you can have leather, but it'll cost you a bit more. And it comes from Bridge of Weir in Scotland, which sources all of its hides from within a very small radius of its factory and uses eco-friendly techniques to make the leather. And if it wasn't making the leather, those hides would just go to landfill anyway, because they come from beef herds. So, you know, you might not like the idea of using leather, but actually in some ways it's just as sustainable, if not more so, than the recycled plastic cloth. Overall quality is really, really good. I mean, this is, yeah, it's more expensive than a Tesla Model Y, but you can feel why in here, because everything looks and feels fantastic. Now, there are some fiddly bits and pieces, like if you want to adjust the steering wheel or the exterior mirrors, you have to go through a menu here on the screen and then use the buttons on the steering wheel. That's really annoying. Can we just please have some physical buttons to do that again, please? There's good storage. There's loads of space here under the front armrest and more USB sockets. Big space down here under the center console, a wireless phone charging pad, good door bins, and it does feel bright and airy. It feels like a spacious cabin. So I think it's going to be a very pleasant place in which to spend some long journeys. But speaking of which, we need to get out on the road and try it out and see if that holds up. So just swapped into this. This is the rear-wheel drive 272 horsepower version of the Polestar 4. And straight away, it feels like a smoother, more easygoing car than the performance version we were just in. Now, I think that's going to be one of the issues with the performance version is not only does it does have the adaptive suspension, which in theory gives you more control and more options and more variation in how comfortably it rides and how stiff it's set up. But being the performance version, it comes with stiffer physical springs. And it just induces a little bit too much fidget and a little bit too much slappiness to the suspension we found on the way up here. It's not that it's desperately uncomfortable, it's definitely not as rough edged as, say, a Tesla Model Y, but it just somehow seems slightly at odds with the 4's character, which we'll get on to more in just a second, because this car, for all the fact that it is quite low slung and relatively overtly sporting, and certainly in the 544 horsepower performance version with 2 motors and 4-wheel drive, it really is sporty, because that's 0 to 100k in 3.8 seconds. That's slightly ridiculous. It nonetheless, there is kind of, you get this lovely calming, pared back minimalist Scandi cabin, which we spoke about earlier, and it just feels like a car that you want to relax a bit more in. Nonetheless, when you do get it onto a tight and twisty road like this, it does actually respond very nicely because the steering is really well weighted and there's surprisingly good feel through the rim. It's not one of those dull, mute electric power assistance systems. It actually feels quite lively. So you can have some fun with this car. But again, I would suggest, and okay, we haven't been driving for hours and hours and days in this, so it is, it's a bit of an extrapolation on my part. But I reckon that this rear-wheel drive version is actually going to be the nicer one to drive than the performance version. And it's not slow. I mean, it'll still do 0 to 100k in under 6 seconds. So, you're definitely not going to be hanging about. And if you're buying this as a family car, and you probably will be, remember that rear legroom, remember that space in the back seats. It's probably something you're going to want to drive in a relaxed and easygoing fashion, because let's face it, the family's going to complain if you don't. Now, I think the one imponderable for the moment is quite how efficient it is. Coming up the motorway stretch in the 2-motor performance version, we were seeing really quite poor economy out of the battery. It was nudging up to about 25-26 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is not great even for a high performance vehicle, because let's again remind ourselves, this is low slung, this is sleek, this is very aerodynamic. That's the whole point of the lack of rear window and all of that. This one does seem a little bit better. I mean, on 80% battery, it's still reading 473 kilometers available, and that's after a morning's relatively hard driving. So, this long-range single-motor version should be okay. I don't know if you'll actually get up past 600 kilometers realistically in everyday driving, but I reckon you should just about nudge past 520, 530, maybe even up to 550 if you're being relatively gentle. But again, it's this rear-wheel drive one. It's the simpler version, I think, that's the one to go for, because it just feels more natural, definitely more comfortable, a little bit more refined than the performance version. And let's face it, you're saving yourself a good few quid, and getting more range into the bargain. So yeah, go for this single motor version. Well, that's the Polestar 4, a really interesting, a really kind of cool car actually, but one with a few quirks you've definitely got to get your head around. Don't forget to head over to the CompleteCar.ie website for reviews of the entire Polestar range, and indeed every other electric car on sale in Ireland, indeed every other car on sale in Ireland. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.